We begin with a controversial change to the death penalty in Israel. Just a few hours ago, the Israeli parliament voted to expand capital punishment, making death by hanging the default punishment for terrorism. It comes despite warnings from several countries, including Germany, the UK, and France. They say that this could damage Israel's democratic standing. Now, the legislation places mandatory death sentences on people convicted of terrorism in a military court. Critics say the punishment will, in practice, apply almost entirely to Palestinians and not Israelis. Far-right National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, whose party introduced the legislation, says that the change will deter Arab terrorism. Our correspondent Emily Gordine, she followed the vote for us from Jerusalem.
Opinion polls have consistently shown that a majority of Jewish Israelis are in favour of the legislation, a reflection really of the broader right-wing shift in the country since the Hamas-led attacks on October 7th, 2023. Critics of the bill, including international allies like Germany, France, Italy and the UK, have warned that it risks undermining Israeli democracy. But that's had little effect on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his government, even though this isolates the country even further internationally. Palestinians in Israel proper and the occupied West Bank are scared of what this bill will mean for them going forward. The ones I've spoken to say it's inhumane and targets them disproportionately, while ignoring the violence Israelis inflict on Palestinians in the West Bank. It also turns the death penalty, which existed in Israel before, from a rarely used provision into a central instrument when dealing with Palestinians. There is one caveat to all of this. The bill will likely be challenged, and once a petition against it has been submitted, the Supreme Court would then have to rule on its legality and could strike at least parts of it down.
That was DW's Emily Gordine there from Jerusalem. Now, shortly before this vote, I spoke with Professor Barak Medina from the Max Planck Center for Democracy, Human Rights and Security at Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And I asked him, is he for or against the change?
Good evening, Ben. I'm fully against this legislation. It puts Israel outside of the liberal democratic world, and I'm quite confident that it will only weaken our position rather than strengthen it.
Let me ask you about what is being said in favor of this legislation. Supporters, including the country's national security minister, say that this is about deterrence in a time of war. Is there any legal or empirical basis to believe that the death penalty will actually prevent terror attacks?
Yeah, probably to the contrary. And here, it's not a matter of legal expertise, but of those who are experts in the fight against terrorism. And we have all of them say explicitly the heads of the Israel security forces are unanimously against this legislation. They are confident that it will only create greater incentives for terrorists to attack against us and to try to achieve their aims. And therefore, it was the traditional position of the heads of the military, of the security forces, to oppose this kind of legislation. And we have, of course, a lot of research in the criminology scholarship that indicates that death penalty does not deter. And therefore, there is a consensus, as I said, in the international democratic world against this kind of measure.
The polls in Israel show that a majority of Israelis are in favor of this change to the death penalty rules. Why should the military, why should the judicial system not follow the will of the people in this case?
Yeah, well, you're right. Unfortunately, there is a strong support, at least among the Jewish sector in Israel, in this measure against terrorists. And in fact, this entire legislation is the result of populism. It indicates populism. At the end of the day, I believe that it will not change anything on the ground. We already have provisions that give the power to courts to set the death penalty in certain instances, and it has never been used other than one incident regarding a Nazi criminal. But other than that, Israeli courts avoided doing that, and I believe that they will continue to avoid using the death penalty. And we can say a word about it in a minute. And the fact that this legislation is promoted is simply a matter of competition among radical right-wing parties in Israel. They try to gain support for the opposition. The prime minister was against it. However, Prime Minister Netanyahu, who is quite strong outside of Israel, is very weak, politically speaking, and he submits to all kinds of partners in his coalition, and he submits to this pressure from the radical right-wing party based on the belief that it will not, in fact, be implemented. So we will pay a price, but diplomatically, internationally, without any benefit. As for your question, of course, the entire idea of human rights, of constitutionalism, is that majority rule does not always prevail. There are limits to the power of the majority. And this specific law is a good indication for that, because one may think that, well, in order to deter potential criminals or even terrorists, one should take this kind of measure. This is, I would, just for the argument's sake of the argument, say it's a legitimate position, but then one would expect that it will be implemented equally. And as you indicated, this legislation tries to make a distinction between Israel as such. In Israel, it will be very hard to impose this death penalty, and people, the Palestinians that live in the occupied territories,
so Professor,
the legislation.
Professor, let me just, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you're saying, though, that if this legislation is passed, it will definitely target the Palestinians for punishment, capital punishment. They are the ones who are being targeted by this legislation.
Yeah, that's for sure. The language of this legislation is clear, and this is why I believe that our Supreme Court will strike it down. The court will strike down the part of the legislation, I expect, that discriminate between Palestinians and Israeli citizens. It cannot hold. The question whether the court will strike down the very decision to impose the death penalty is open, and I believe that the court will not resolve it immediately. It will wait that a decision comes, and then it will have to resolve it. But the law as such includes two different provisions, one that applies to Israeli citizens and one that should apply to Palestinians that live in the occupied territories. And this is a discriminatory measure that will clearly not hold. And it's very, the court already struck down invalidated legislation that discriminated in this way on a much lower scale, in less important aspects, and it's very likely that the court will strike down this aspect of the law.
Okay, well, we will be following to see what the Supreme Court does if it's brought up before the highest court. Professor Barak, Medina, we appreciate your time and your insights tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben.